Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Americans are speaking up about politics, and we live in what appears to be an increasingly polarized nation. With all the hyper-partisan jargon out there, you would be forgiven for believing that companies should stay out of the fray. But that's not what their workers want. In fact, 90% of workers say that they feel it is at least moderately important that their organization is involved in social change, according to a recent report from the Conference Board in New York. This is relevant to all Americans. Companies are more frequently taking stands on social change issues, and where those companies draw the line affects workers and customers. With brands like Nike, Chick-fil-A, and Target taking stands on social issues, we will all undoubtedly encounter this debate at some point. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by the two researchers who authored this report from the Conference Board. And first up, we have Amanda Popiela, who is a researcher in human capital for the Conference Board. Before joining the Conference Board, Amanda was a member of the Peace Corps. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Brain, Behavior, and Cognitive Sciences from the University of Michigan and is currently pursuing an MBA at New York University. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And we're also joined by Dr. Robin Erickson, who has been on The State of Us before. She is a principal researcher for the Conference Board. She holds a PhD in organizational change and an MS in communications from Northwestern University, an MA in theology from Northern Seminary, and an AB from the University of Chicago. Thanks for being here again, Robin.
Thanks so much, Justin. It's great to be back.
And of course, we could not begin this critical conversation without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Kind of low there compared to the guests, aren't I? I should get to write up an intro.
I think
it can't
so.
be as good as theirs, but I got to come up with something. But no, your friendly redneck liberals here, and we'll do the best we can to hang with the big boys today.
I should have led with
the big girls. All right.
The 35 years in education, senior historian
I'm good.
for TrueChat.
I'm listening. I liked their report. I read it and I found it very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to talking to them.
And we both got some questions for him, so we'll try to get through this, and hopefully our listeners today will get an idea of how this will impact them, but also what the future might hold. So
exactly,
as I mentioned at the beginning, 90% of workers, Amanda, say that they feel it is at least moderately important that their organization is involved in social change. I mean, that's a pretty large percentage. So what exactly qualifies as quote unquote social change, and how are organizations championing it through advertising and fundraising?
So social change isn't a new concept. In sociology, it's really the change in behavioral or cultural norms or values in a society. So today it's things like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, marriage equality, gun control, the legalization of marijuana in the U.S. So all of these are kind of social change issues that we're talking about today. And our research focuses on social change as it relates to organizations. So looking at how an organization's leadership or brand or the resources that it has are influencing cultural and social norms.
As we look at this, there's a lot of different ways that organizations go about being supportive of or helping cause social change or weighing in on these issues. So what exactly are some of the things that these companies are doing with their advertising and fundraising to be part of this?
Yeah. One of my favorite examples is Heineken beer and their campaign from a few years ago, Worlds Apart, that started a dialogue between people with different political positions. So this was an advertising campaign. We already talked about Nike and the advertisements with Colin Kaepernick. That's another example that's kind of hot in the media now. There are also companies that are supporting social causes through donations and fundraising. So an example of this is Procter & Gamble's donation to the U.S. women's soccer team to address the gender pay gap. And also the MAC Viva Glam line that donates 100% of proceeds to social causes. They support all ages, all races, and all genders. So things like fighting HIV and AIDS, supporting LGBTQ youth, health testing for women, things like that. So organizations are doing a lot of things proactively to support social change. And then our report also talks about some organizations that are in the news and in the media for not taking a stance or for not doing enough. So if you think about large retailers who are selling assault weapons after mass shootings, there's a lot of immediate attention there. And people kind of saying that maybe they should be taking a stance on some of these issues.
So this could be, as we've highlighted, some things that probably come to mind for people like you mentioned, the Nike and Colin Kaepernick situation. But this can also be companies doing something like trying to unite people around a common goal or cause, or trying to open up a dialogue about something. So it's not necessarily that we believe or we're on blank side. It could also be we're about furthering this dialogue or trying to encourage it in some way. So sometimes it's not necessarily a controversial stance they're taking. It could also be just like a general position about trying to help society.
That's exactly right. And we did find, so in our research, we looked at 15 specific items that had to do with employees and how employees show up to work. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of those specific issues, but some of them are controversial. Some of them are more political issues, and others are things that I think most people would agree are the right thing to do. So yeah, there's kind of both sides of it there.
And just to add to that conversation, Justin, you had mentioned Chick-fil-A at the top of the piece, and organizations do take a faith-based public stance on social change issues, like Chick-fil-A has done, and then other organizations have been forced into the spotlight through customers and social media. For example, highly publicized Starbucks and Sephora temporarily closed all of their stores to address racial profiling. So there's many different reasons why organizations are having to deal with social change.
Well, Robin, to follow up a little bit, you mentioned in your report that workers sometimes, your numbers show that they trust their company more than the government when it comes to taking positions on social change. What else contributes to their desire for the company they work for to have positions on social change issues?
Sure. The statistic that we were quoting was specifically around the fact that the 2019 Edelman Trust Barometer found that 58% of employees expect their employers to be a trustworthy source of information about social change issues. And in fact, employees trust their employers to do the right thing more than they trust the government, the media, or NGOs when it comes to social change issues. But this higher level of trust, right, in organizations also comes with higher expectations. Edelman also found that organizations are only partially responding to social change. And so that the change that organizations are making are significantly short of employee expectations. And that's why we called our report Higher Expectations. And it's sort of a virtuous cycle, because as social media highlights these different issues, I mean, almost every week there's something new in the news that we see. As social media highlights things, employees become more concerned about issues. And as employees become more concerned about issues, many organizations then feel the need to respond. And so it's almost a virtuous cycle. There's also been some research done that shows that millennials and the Generation Z actually care an awful lot about an organization's corporate social responsibility, values, what they're doing, and sort of how that organization is perceived. And so I think that organizations, many of them, are responding to that as well.
So as workers get younger, as the working class gets younger, you think we'll see more and more of this? Is that kind of what you're theorizing then?
I don't think social change is going to go away.
Okay.
Because every single day there's something new in the media that affects employees. And when you think about it, as Amanda said, there were 15 different issues that we look like that we believed affect employees, particularly in their in their in their work life. And one of the interviews that we had, we asked a number of organizations how they define social change. And one of the companies said that we respond to social change because we want employees to feel like there is a place for them here. We provide external messaging aligned with the organization's values, that all communities are welcome and that we want the best and the brightest, and that the best talent comes from a variety of groups. And so it's really not fair to expect employees to check their concerns at the door when they get to work. And as we all know, there's a lot of conversations that take place at the water cooler, or in Slack or Skype, however those conversations are happening today. Mm-hmm. And employees do care about these issues. Many of them affect them or their families or their close friends.
And with the job market being as it is, if companies don't react to what their employees want, then those workers could go elsewhere. Is that also?
And that's exactly what our last podcast was on.
Okay.
Was around job satisfaction and whether or not employees are satisfied, and the very tight labor market, which makes it easier for employees to find jobs somewhere else.
So we've been talking with Dr. Robin Erickson and Amanda Popiela, who are both the researchers and authors of the Conference Board's recent report, Higher Expectations: How Organizations Engage with Social Change Issues. A reminder that if you want to reference or look at any of this stuff for yourself, you can go to thestateofus.org. We've got a lot more to cover with these two more segments coming up here to try to break this down and get through everything. So keep it right here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
What risks do businesses take by supporting social change? That's what we're about to answer. We're talking with Dr. Robin Erickson, who's a principal researcher of the Conference Board, and Amanda Popiela. Both of these two ladies were the authors and researchers for the Conference Board's recent report, Higher Expectations: How Organizations Engage with Social Change. So, Robin, what risks do businesses take by supporting social change issues?
Actually, organizations take a number of risks. And in our survey, we actually asked our survey respondents whether or not their organization had responded to we looked at 15 different social change issues. And we asked if they had, if their organizations had responded publicly, internally only, publicly and internally, or if they hadn't responded at all. And when you stop to think about it, when organizations take a response, take a stance on any issue, no matter what the side is, it can be perceived positively or negatively by both their customers and by their employees. And both customers and employees will affect profitability. And so organizations definitely need to have a plan in place. They need to think about it. We're actually coming out here at the Conference Board, if it hasn't come out already, very soon, looking at some of the choices that consumers make and around social change issues. And, they can choose to boycott an organization. And so customers can boycott brands that take a stand that they don't agree with on social change issues. And then many customers think that organizations should use their public prominence to engage in these issues, that large companies and brands have an ability, if not a responsibility, to create change that individuals can't match on their own. The same thing goes with employees, right? Employees can either choose to agree with the stance their organization is taking, or they can choose to vote with their feet, right? They can leave an organization if they don't agree with the stance.
It's kind of interesting because you talked a little bit about they can respond internally or externally, and also what the expectations are, both from employees and a customer standpoint, as to whether or not companies have this stance at all. But part of what I wonder is, in today's age, do we know anything about? And I guess maybe this is just more of a curiosity, but isn't there a risk factor associated with, if a company's only responding internally? that it's going to get out anyway. So, I mean, obviously they still have to think about how they're going to craft that internal response in such a way that when almost inevitably the broad public finds out, especially if it's a larger organization, that's not something that they deal with the fallout on. So I'm wondering, do we know much about, is there significant differentiation between how companies respond to something internally versus externally?
So we looked at that, and actually there was some some distinction between the social change items that the respondents thought their organization should respond to internally, and those they thought that they shouldn't respond to at all. By and large, everyone that we spoke to said that they thought their organization should respond both internally and externally, not publicly only. Or externally only. Although some organizations that we interviewed, some organizations where the organization's leadership had responded externally only and hadn't followed up with a message to employees.
So maybe it's a factor of personalizing the message, or at least making it more real from how does this actually apply to us as a company? So maybe not that the message itself is different or the end goal is different, but you have one message that's going to the broad public where you don't necessarily have to get into the details about what does this mean for you as a worker, but employees would like to see that follow up internally with not just the lip service to the public. Is that what we're finding from this?
Yes. Well, and remember too that there's so many social change issues. We just looked at 15.
Right.
There's many more that we didn't even look at that affect us all on a daily basis, or that we can read about in the news every day. And so an organization could spend all of their time responding to these issues. So in some cases, they need to pick the ones that matter the most to their employees and to their stakeholders, to their boards, to their owners, to their customers, and to their employees.
We're going to switch to Amanda here. Amanda, Robin mentioned that that you looked at 15 different topics. I'm going to kind of take it. Obviously, some have to be at the top and some have to be at the bottom, but some of them that were at the bottom, topics like gun control, sizeism, and immigration. Why did people say they considered those things that companies shouldn't address?
Yeah, and it is interesting because out of the 15 items, there was only one that the majority of respondents said their organization should not respond to, and that was gun control. Others that received a high level of response that the company should not respond were, as you said, immigration, nationalism was also up on the list. These are all political issues. So a lot of our respondents were saying our company doesn't have to respond to this. They actually should stay out of that realm because there are people that work for this company on both sides of the issue. And it really doesn't make sense for the company to take a stance when it's going to leave somebody out. And as I think Robin mentioned earlier, it's really the idea of taking a stance on social change issues is to show everyone that they belong here, and that the company is using its platform to fight for the causes that employees agree with. So when it's these more political issues, it makes sense to kind of stay out of that realm. You also mentioned sizeism. Interestingly, that's not a political issue, at least as far as I know. But right. We found a lot of people didn't actually know what that meant. So we got a few comments that said that they were looking it up as they were completing the survey. So it's a weight bias in organizations.
So that may be more why, since it's not, it doesn't fit that category of a political issue. So they're saying then as the things then that where it's more to be inclusive and to treat people the right way, those issues are safe. They're okay, but not to get involved in the more controversial ones because that's not good for not only worker morale, but also for the bottom line of the company.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Exactly.
All right.
So one of the things as we're going through this that I'm kind of wondering about, Robin, is we've got kind of what Lance and I talked about before the show. There's a little bit of a paradox going on, and it's kind of, do people choose to work for a company because of what the company believes, or do companies support what their employees believe? So who's driving this, or is it kind of the chicken and the egg? We don't really know for sure, but we could spend a long time debating it.
Am I allowed to say it depends?
Yeah.
Well, when I broached that question to Justin, he goes, both. And I'm like, let's ask them and see what they say.
I would say both. I would say that depending on how important an issue is to someone, they very well may pick an organization that shares the same values that they have.
Go ahead. But do we see a generational difference among workers as to how important it is for these social changes to be a part of things? I mean, do the Gen Xers and the Gen Zers and all those things that Justin's always telling me about, does that make a difference as far as more validity to what they're looking for in a workplace?
Lance, it really does make a difference. The different generations, the younger generation specifically, do care more, as I mentioned earlier, about many of these social change issues. In addition, when you look at some of the issues that are at the top of the list in terms of our respondents thinking that their organization should respond, gender, disabilities, LGBTQ, many people will choose to work for an organization or leave an organization if they don't feel that their values are in alignment. So, as a woman, I don't want to work someplace that, there's a glass ceiling when it comes to, how far up the organization women can go. Then you can think about the same thing around disabilities. If an organization doesn't have anybody who's disabled, or another big issue is around LGBTQ with benefits and marriage equality. That has made a big difference for a lot of people. And I also think that because those issues do matter to employees, then that the companies then start to create those employee resource groups or business resource groups and address many of those issues.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Yeah. We did hear at least one of the companies that we interviewed said that they use their social change initiatives as a recruiting tool. So if we think about how people will join or leave a brand as a consumer for the social causes that they support, I think it's even a greater extent. You're going to work for a company that you agree with their policies and their social change beliefs. So I think that's an aspect too, and companies are thinking about using it as a recruiting tool.
Well, that's very interesting. And I've got two adult daughters, and I know that these issues that you're talking about are very important to them, and they actually have looked for companies, look for places to work where their personal issues are met. So that makes sense. Your research is at least spot on in my household. So is there anything else that you think we should know about this before we go on in the final segment and talk about what we think the future? I know we've already said that social change issues are here to stay because of the media and all that kind of those things. But is there anything else that either one of you'd like to put in here before we move on?
I think organizations, if they don't know what their employees think, they should ask them.
Good point.
And, there's employee engagement surveys. They could do a special pulse survey looking at social change issues. But if an organization doesn't know what their employees think is most important, they should ask their employees what's most important to them.
And with technology today, it's so easy to do.
Correct.
It doesn't take much time to get that out and to get the results.
So we've been talking with Dr. Robin Erickson and Amanda Popiela, who are both researchers and authors of the Conference Board report, Higher Expectations. We're going to talk about what the future holds here in a moment. And if you want to follow along, thestateofus.org, all the ways to listen can be found there. And Lance, we're doing this today because all of the podcasts on TrueChat's network pursue a common goal. Isn't that right?
That is true.
And what is that goal?
Well, TrueChat's mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
We've got more to come with Dr. Robin Erickson and Amanda Popiela on the Higher Expectations report from the Conference Board. Keep it right here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Higher Expectations, how organizations engage with social change issues. This is a new report from the Conference Board in New York, and we're joined by Dr. Robin Erickson and Amanda Popiela, the researchers and authors of this report. One of the main goals, Amanda, on The State of Us is to discuss solutions and talk about actionable items. We like to make sure listeners know what's next, what can they do. With more workers saying it is important that companies are involved in social change, what can employees do to be a positive part of this process?
Well, I love that question. Yes, employees, we saw in our research, play a huge role in this, and companies are listening to what employees want. So Robin mentioned earlier the places in an organization that often drive the change. It's usually, senior leadership or HR, diversity and inclusion, communications departments. So one thing is to talk to those areas of the organization, ask if there is a policy in place for addressing social change issues. And if not, get the organization thinking about it. Another popular area to address social change issues are the employee groups. So employee network, resource groups, business resource groups. So joining one of those groups is a good way to kind of lend your voice to the issues that are important to other members of the organization, and to kind of help the organization see what issues are top of mind for employees and to kind of speak out on the issues. So I would say those to me are the two areas, just speaking to the organization or joining one of those research groups and lending your voice to the organization.
So, I think the big thing here sounds like, you want employees to be a positive part of it, but that is important to highlight, because you also don't want to create this internal problem with your employer, especially because that's part of the interesting thing I think that I learned from this report is it seems like employees are doing this because they care about the issue, but also because they care about if their company cares about the issue. So in an effort to hopefully keep that relationship good, some of those things you mentioned, I think, could definitely be a big help.
Okay.
Thinking about the goal of social change, it's to create positive change in our society. So I think that absolutely makes sense, to be that positive voice and to stand for something is an important aspect of what a company should be doing today. So, yeah.
That's very good. Very good. Robin, just very quickly, organizations face numerous challenges when taking on social change topics. From demonstrating authentic compassion to respecting customers' opinions, how can companies effectively navigate this new landscape? I know you mentioned just shortly before that they should need to find out what their workers think, but can you go into any more detail, or what do you really think they need to do to be able to maneuver this?
Sure. I was just going to say the first thing they need to do is make sure they understand the social issues that matter most to their employees. And then they need to think about partnering with leadership to find leaders in senior roles who are passionate and are willing to champion them. And then think about how the organization measures these items, the diversity and inclusion constructs that are often associated with social change issues. For example, equity in terms of pay, opportunity, training, that sort of thing. And then last but definitely not least, once an organization has decided to respond to an issue, they need to remember that they need to if they're going to respond publicly, they need to ensure that their internal communications are timed appropriately and that they're consistent with the public response, and that they also allow their employees time to process and ask questions. Sit down with your employees face to face and allow them to ask questions, especially around particularly sensitive issues.
So it sounds like there's a number of ways for companies to kind of go about navigating this and how to think about everything, how to approach it. But I'd assume that part of this, Robin, is what do companies do? Because you don't want to wait, right, until this stuff actually happens. So do you have any recommendations for what companies should do to prepare for this and plan for it?
Exactly. You can't plan for the flood when it's raining. So we do recommend that organizations consider creating a playbook for these different social change issues, thinking about, what are the questions that they're going to ask themselves? What are their policies that might be in place? what are the drawbacks? What are the risks? Do you have a way to listen to your employees to find out how they feel about certain issues? And just thinking, how have you responded in the past? And that should affect how you respond in the future. So think about a set of guidelines or a playbook for how you can respond to different issues, because when they come up, organizations need to be prepared.
Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly.
Well, if it's something that workers are caring about, especially in such, large numbers, right? 90% have some sort of interest in companies caring about this. It seems like it's not really, it's almost not optional. It's like, even if you decide as a company that maybe you're not going to take really strong stands on controversial issues, you should at least have a plan to answer the inevitable questions that will come up about these, because it sounds like it's less of a question of if and more of a question of when, if it hasn't already occurred for a company. So it sounds like that they should be planning for the flood for sure, if it hasn't started to rain for them already. So, and if it is, if they're already in that situation, right, better to begin now than to wait longer and let it fester.
Exactly. No, companies just need to think about what they care the most about, who their stakeholders are, and employees, their boards, their owners, their customers, and then figure out what they can do and what they want to do and what they can do.
We've had the privilege today of speaking with Dr. Robin Erickson and Amanda Popiela, both researchers and the authors of the Conference Board's recent report, Higher Expectations: How Organizations Engage with Social Change Issues. Robin and Amanda, thank you so much both for being here.
Thanks so much, Justin and Lance. Really appreciated the time that we could spend with you today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great being here.
So Lance, we've challenged people to broaden the horizons of this discussion, right? We're trying to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And the most effective way to do that is if we get more people to tune in and be part of this conversation. So if you're out there challenging your friends to tune in to The State of Us, what are the ways you could invite them to listen?
Well, you've got Stitcher, you've got my personal favorite, Spotify, and then also Apple Podcasts and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
And of course, you can find all the ways to listen at thestateofus.org, along with other resources, including links to social media. So please be sure to check it out. For The State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.